Hello, welcome to Reading Together. My name is Jovan Kurbalija, and today, together with you, I will read the UN Secretary General Roadmap for Digital Cooperation. The roadmap was presented yesterday to international community. I would like also to thank all of you for making quite substantive comments on our previous readings together, especially on the US President Executive Order on the liability of the Internet platforms. Before we dive deep with the highlighter into the text of the roadmap for digital cooperation, let us see what is the short history of the roadmap. The UN Secretary General established the high-level panel on digital cooperation in 2018. The high-level panel spent 1 year consulting in preparing the report, which is the basis for this roadmap. The report was issued in June last year. And based on this report, the Secretary General and his team organized consultations with the tech community, governments, and other actors, resulting in the roadmap. The roadmap has various possible uses, but one general broader framework is contribution to discussion about digital social contract. Every era, every society had some sort of tacit social contract deciding about the core values and main priorities of society. We are currently discussing the way how we can maximize use of technology and minimize the risk that new digital technology is creating to our society. The first comment on the text itself is that unlike the previous report of the high-level panel, it is becoming an official document. As you can see, it has a letterhead of the UN General Assembly. In the text itself, there is a clear indication about the urgency to deal with digital policy issues in the summary and the reference to COVID-19. Throughout the text, we will be making annotations. You can find annotations at the Digital Watch/roadmap website. The roadmap will have two speeds: fast, triggered by COVID-19 pandemic, and slow, anchoring digital into Agenda 2030 dynamics. I won't be making those text because then it will take us much longer for me to type the text, but you can find comments on highlights at our website. I will post it and we will move on. Here is the content of architecture of the roadmap or zoom out view. You have background, you have introduction, and then you have two parts on which we will focus. The first is consideration of the recommendation of the high-level panel on digital cooperation, and the fourth section is concluding observation way forward. Section 3 provides general framing or background information and link to the panel's findings. And Section 4, which will be in our focus, provides the list of concrete actions and steps proposed and advised by the UN Secretary General. Now let us move to the text itself. As we notice, background and introduction will skip, and we will move just to few highlights from the introduction. It is clearly anchoring the discussion in the COVID-19 pandemic context. One of the new element in discussion comparing to panel's report is focus on the environment. Panel missed this aspect of the impact of digital technology on the environment. And then we have also a reference to the 11 norms of the responsible state behavior. Those are some highlights from introduction, but let us move directly into the third section, organized around the main recommendation provided by the panel. The first section is on inclusive digital economy and society, and the recommendation 1A on global connectivity. Recommendation 1A has two major highlights. First is the question of access, and the second is the question of affordability. What does it mean? You can have access, telecommunication access, you can have cables, you may have satellites, as SpaceX project is undergoing with so many satellites providing internet connection. But in order to make this connection effective and genuinely inclusive, connection has to be affordable in economic terms, but also in broader terms of people having skills to utilize that particular technology. Therefore, accessibility and affordability key highlights in this part. And further down in the point 16, you have also the introduction of the concept of baselines regarding the fundamental level of digital connectivity that individual needs to access the online space. Throughout the roadmap, you will see that there is a push towards evidence and data about digital cooperation, moving from broad principles to very concrete way of measuring what is really going on in the internet. And I think it is highly, highly useful and welcoming development. Recommendation 1B is interesting because it provides input to the discussion on the social contract. It refers to return to open source ethos of the internet, early ethos of the internet, and regaining some sort of the early spirit of the internet. And it then moves on to the few interesting points. One is the link between concept of the digital public goods and sustainable development goals. You will see that digital public goods are introduced throughout the document, and they are one of the development pillars of the roadmap. Then there is a reference to in the 25, paragraph 25 on common standards on open data. Currently, in another interesting process which is happening in Geneva, which is Road to Bern, Road to the World Data Summit, which or forum that should be held in October, we've been discussing the way how to connect data provided by health organization, migration, humanitarian trade, concentrated in Geneva. And there is a fascinating discussion on the common standards on open data and the way how we can make this data available to the global community. Therefore, this 1B has in essence, return to open access as early ethos of the internet, digital public goods and linked to SDGs, and common standards on open data. Recommendation 1C is a recommendation on digital inclusion. Inclusion is one of the most frequently used terms throughout the roadmap. On this point, there is interesting paragraph, para 26, which in a way provide overall mapping of the different actors which are currently excluded. In addition to gender inclusion, which is echoing throughout the inclusion section, it's interesting that we have a stronger focus on migrants, refugees, and internally displaced persons. This is the highly important element, and it is probably coming from the UN Secretary General's background and the team of people around him. As you know, he was in charge of a refugee organization, and that missing element is now corrected in this document. Now, further down in the section 29, there is a reference to set of metrics to measure digital inclusion. It is in a way application of question of the baseline, and here the roadmap is calling to the concrete metrics data on measuring digital inclusion. It is important to highlight that inclusion is not only related to access and even affordability. It is related to policy inclusion, that people can voice their opinions in the global discussion. It is related to the knowledge. It is related to multilingualism, and there are close to 20 different type of inclusions that we are currently mapping at Diplo, and here is the taxonomy of digital inclusion that we will be shortly presenting to international community. Now the next section is on the human and institutional capacity. It is a cross-cutting section, and here we have a few highlights. Shift from a supply-driven to needs-driven based capacity development. This is highly important. And again, echoing theme, as I highlighted before, better evidence on the needs for capacity development. Avoiding the one size fits approach, which has been quite dominant. One line on one word that provides some hope that we will move beyond understanding capacity development as a simple training towards institutional building and systemic interventions. While the training is definitely needed, what we are seeing in digital field that there are no strong enough institutions to ensure sustainability of the development of digital skills, digital capacities, and in particular digital governance skills in countries worldwide. Here is the roadmap is building on the digital help desk, which was proposed by the panel's report. In the next section, there is reference to the resident coordinator as a bridge between broader UN system and the member states. And the resident coordinators are frequently mentioned during in the document. In human rights and human agency section, there are a few highlights. In Article 39, we have a call for companies to have effective due diligence in order to ensure that technology product policy processes observe human rights. We'll highlight that and we'll provide more references. Generally speaking, human rights and human agency section is more codifying section. For example, it just reiterates that human rights offline apply online. Then the section on human rights focuses on the few specific fields. First is data protection and privacy. In data protection and privacy, there are general points, but one point is worth mentioning. And this is probably input to the social contract discussion. This is indication that current financial model for social media platforms effectively encourages the collection of personal data for commercial purposes. And that is extremely important. Therefore, it is a reference to the structural challenge. Let's just quickly explain what is going on in this field. As you can see, we as internet users, we share the data for free or not against financial use of the services like Google, Facebook, Twitter. Those companies in this traditional model monetize our data with the vendors or themselves in exchange for the financial remuneration or money in this case. And then we are paying for goods and services provided by vendors. This is the core model, the financial and business model behind the main internet platforms. And the roadmap is pointing to this structural change, which is a part of this discussion on the social contract. Let's move it to digital identity, highly controversial issue, and also issue that raised long debates in the panel's work. And I can see that roadmap is more or less codifying, which was discussed in the panel, and highlighting a few points which are important for the ensuring the digital identity. including recognition of multiple form of the identity, space for anonymity, respect of privacy, ensuring that there is a transparency and individual data are used by governments and other entities. Let's highlight, and you will get to the more details in the follow-up. Then we have surveillance. In surveillance, there is a particular focus on the question of the facial recognition. Facial recognition as important element in the overall surveillance policies and strategies of governments and companies worldwide. Then on online harassment, there is some sort of a taxonomy of people who are particularly exposed to online harassment. This is this rather long paragraph. And you can have here from environmental defenders to the youth religious group, and we will go through the list in annotated comment. There are two elements in Article 52 which are worth considering. One is a question of trade-off in digital policy between encryption and protection of privacy and anonymity. It is one of the core issues that we will be discussing. The roadmap is not going into details, but it is just hinting as one of the challenges, and then it has also called to the content governance framework. Basically here, it is referring what is currently going on. In May, French Parliament introduced the new law on the content. President Trump issued executive order, also focusing on the liability of tech companies on the content on the internet. Then we move quickly to the recommendation 3C on artificial intelligence. Here, this recommendation is mainly focusing on the question of the governance, and that could have been easily dropped into the section on the governance. Basically, it indicates a gap in international coordination, cooperation, and governance. It applies to more or less any governance on any digital issue. It refers to lack of representation, inclusiveness in global digital discussion, especially from developing countries, and lack of overall coordination when it comes to the AI. But again, this is applicable for. It is one of the gaps that we identified at the panel as a cross-cutting gap. And then there is in point B as well, there is no common platform to bring these separate initiatives together. This is huge and underlying problem in digital governance and overall digital cooperation. And then in point C, that there is a link to SDGs, to basically use of AI to support implementation of SDGs. What is really missing is possibility to use the SDGs to guide developments of AI. Together with human rights principles, SDGs are codification and operational codification of the core values of humanity. Therefore, that could be another direction, not only using AI to implement SDGs, but also using SDGs to basically guide the future development of AI. The next section deals with trust, security, and stability. It is more or less codification of what's going on, summary on these developments. Para 63 is interesting because it is listing the main non-governmental or multi-stakeholder initiatives, including Paris Call, the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, Global Commission on Cyber Stability, and the Christchurch Call to Action. We'll see later on that it is this call for approach is a bit lost in the operational part of the conclusions. Then there are references to the government group of experts, an open-ended working group on developing the field of information technology in the context of international security. Two major intergovernmental processes which are currently going on. And useful link to the SDGs. This is very often forgotten that cybersecurity impacts the development agenda. Then we are coming to the global digital cooperation, which essentially deals with digital governance. The report is highlighting the three models which were proposed by the panel's report: Internet Governance Forum, plus a distributed co-governance architecture, and a digital commons architecture. In addition to the points which were mentioned as a gap in the previous part related to artificial intelligence that can be easily included here, there is also one important part. There's a lack of common entry point into global digital architecture, which makes it especially hard for developing countries, small and medium size enterprise, marginalized group, and other stakeholders with limited budget and expertise to make their voice heard. This is a huge challenge for many actors and genuine inclusivity in digital policy. Then there is indication that this part is not yet closed because there are still ongoing consultations on these three models, and there is a momentum in the support of the Internet Governance Plus model. Then we move to the section 4, which provides next steps for digital policy, including the section on the United Nations as a convener and the platform. And here in section 4, you will have a concrete suggestion. For example, the Secretary General indicates that I intend to appoint the envoy on technology in 2021 with a specific task to advise the senior leadership. And in particular, interesting is to be a first port of call for the broader United Nations system. Then UN is planned to map the technology and digital parts and function throughout the UN system. You will see that mapping is also one of the underlying concepts and the calls for any issues from digital inclusion, as we saw previously, to this. The UN will, and here is an interesting that there are two types of calls. There are called by Secretary General, UN, and also call for other actors to join. He is reiterating the baseline for digital connectivity that we already discussed. He's proposing establishing a financing platform for investment in connectivity, in particular to reach in hard to reach and the rural areas. Then suggesting transforming models to accelerate connectivity, building on some experience from the UNICEF and the ITU. And one element which is extremely important, especially in the context of the COVID-19 and some similar crises, is emergency preparedness for the digital community. Now the next section is on digital public goods. Call for open source software, open data, open artificial intelligence model, open standards, open content. Open is the most frequently used word in the roadmap, building on previous return to early ethos of the internet. Here is also an interesting aspect where basically the roadmap is referring to two dynamics in this field. By deploying digital public goods as a part of their immediate efforts to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, and in the future as a part of their approach to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Therefore, this is the best summary of the two speeds of the roadmap and our work that we'll have to make based on the roadmap ahead of us. On digital inclusion, next point, there is a call, or no, there is a commitment by Secretary General saying, I will establish a multi-stakeholder digital inclusion coalition. Here is, you will say with the tech envoy, he refers, I intend to establish, here is a strong commitment, I will establish a digital inclusion coalition. And again, back to the very important aspect in the roadmap, call for the more evidence-based. In this case, a development of the, let me see, annual scorecards on digital inclusion and the establishment of metrics to measure digital inclusion and other aspects. Then he is also, Secretary Roadmap is calling on the mapping of exercise on digital inclusion. Our reading together comes to concluding observations and way forward, the fourth section in the roadmap. In this section, the roadmap provides a signpost for the future journey on digital cooperation. Let us see what are these main signposts that we are likely to follow and observe in the coming months and years. First, on the UN United Nations as a convener and platform, there is offer by UN to serve as a platform for policy dialogue on the emerging technologies outlined above. That is an important element, and that offer will have to be concretized, for example, on current challenge, how to negotiate and discuss issue of the tracing applications for the COVID-19 crisis. What is the place where countries, companies, and other actors can go and discuss standards on contact tracing apps? Is it the Internet Governance Forum as established and available space or some other space? That issue will have to be clarified in the coming months. Second, the Secretary General indicate I intend to appoint an envoy on technology in 2021. That's important element. We'll later on focus also on language. You will see that at some points the Secretary General say I will, in some other case I intend, and that there is a gradation in some sort of commitment for the follow-up actions. The tech envoy will advise the senior leadership to United Nations on key trends in technology, and he or she will be also a first port of call for the broader United Nations system. In this point, the roadmap addresses this concern of reducing noise and confusion in digital governance and cooperation with so many bodies, including in the UN system. Therefore, it can help in addressing this major concern. In the Para 75, the UN plans to map the technology and digital parts and functions throughout the UN system. Mapping is one of the underlying points throughout the roadmap. In particular, it will also link to the forthcoming report on the Task Force on Digital Financing and SDGs, an important document which can complement this roadmap. Next major signposts on this roadmap are related to digital connectivity. Here is important to say that UN will, the Secretary General in this case does not call for others, but commit the UN to support efforts to establish a baseline. Therefore, that's reference to the evidence-based policy making. Also convene a group of investors and financing experts to consider development of financial platform for the investment in connectivity. Maybe that there could be some link to the previous task force which was indicated in the previous para. Then promote new and potential transformative models to accelerate connectivity with a few references to United Nations Children's Fund and International Telecommunication Union. And then there is a question, part of emergency preparedness, which is very topical today when we discuss the COVID-19 and our response to COVID-19. The next set of signposts relate to digital public goods. And here the keywords is open. Open is, by the way, the most frequently used word throughout the roadmap, 22 times. In this section, it refers to open and software, data, artificial intelligence, standards, content as major elements that can contribute towards the digital public goods. In Article 72 is very interesting because it summarizes also two speeds of a roadmap journey. Immediate efforts to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, and in the future as a part of their approach to achieving the goals, sustainable development goals. Therefore, this two-speed dynamics on this journey, one which we can describe as sprint and other which we can describe more as a marathon. Then we move to the signposts organized around digital inclusion. Here, the UN Secretary General is strongly committed, and he says, I will establish a multi-stakeholder digital inclusion coalition. In the same para, he is also referring to the annual scorecard for the measuring of the inclusion around the question of literacy and other aspects of inclusion. Here in this section, he's also calling for the mapping. Mapping is underlying point throughout the document, and that's in the para 82. UN system will undertake a mapping of exercise of a digital inclusion initiatives. Next section is on digital capacity building. Again, the keyword is mapping. There will be a lot of job for digital cartographers in the coming period. And the call to launch a broad network to promote holistic and inclusive approach to digital capacity building for sustainable development. This is quite important formulation, again focusing on holistic as important aspect. Next, this network should provide a clearinghouse function. A clearinghouse function to help to direct specific requests for support to potential providers of guidance, funding, advice, and digital readiness needs assessment, digital strategy support, and digital literacy and skill training. Here is an interesting aspect. The question of help desk, observatory, or in this case formulated as clearinghouse, was related mainly to the question of digital governance and finding this entry point to the member states, companies, and other actors. Here, the clearinghouse is framed in the rather specific development aspect. Therefore, that will need to be clarified in the follow-up discussion to the roadmap. How this clearinghouse will also serve digital governance or observatory or help desk. There is a potential for ambiguity in this section. Then resident coordinators are highlighted throughout the document as a key bridge between international efforts and the national efforts in this field. In digital human rights section, we have a call for the development by the UN High Commission for Human Rights of system-wide guidelines on human rights. And there is also a call on technology leaders to urgently and public acknowledge the importance of protecting the rights of privacy, and other human rights. In this section, there are also calls for outside actors, as we'll see later on in the summary. On artificial intelligence, the Secretary General intend to establish a multi-stakeholder advisory board on advisory body. We'll see what type of that advisory body will be. And here he provides a healthy anchoring of discussion that he will take into account existing mandates and institutions. It is important formulation because there is a bit of fatigue on discussion of uniqueness of AI around the inflation of ethical principle. And as EU's AI strategy shows, AI can be governed to the large extent with existing mechanisms and existing tools, focusing on data protection, consumer protection, liability of actors. Therefore, there is less need for unique AI governance than it was thought, let's say, 1 year ago. On digital trust and security, Secretary General is working obviously very, very carefully this, one can say, policy minefield, and he's calling for overarching statement outlining common elements of understandings on digital trust and security. This is probably the maximum that one can expect today when there are two parallel processes, government group of experts, open-ended working group, and quite a few controversies around the question of cybersecurity or information security. Another interesting twist and important is that instead of going into the controversial aspects, the roadmap is anchoring it and into the development agenda. And this has been really missing aspect of the cyber security discussion by linking it to Agenda 2030 and linking it to the question of digital divide. There is a call not to duplicate efforts which are already efforts of the UNGG and open-ended working group. Here in the para 92, he's suggesting that first member states adopt, therefore moving to intergovernmental process, and then open the statement to endorsements by other stakeholders, such as private sector and the others. It is also a realistic formulation. You can see from this drafting that a lot of time was spent on making the right and realistic balance while moving the discussion on cybersecurity a bit forward. In the section on global digital cooperation, or we can call it digital governance, there is clear indication that there is ongoing process of consultations among stakeholders. Therefore, roadmap is coming at the point which can roadmap is trying to codify the current level of discussion, but not precluding the outcome of the overall consultations. It is essentially Secretary General focusing on the Internet Governance Forum, which is basically within his mandate to propose the actions, and he is suggesting one interesting aspect here, which is that in empowering the multi-stakeholder advisor group, and he said the following: coordinate follow-up advisory group, follow-up action on forum discussions, and relay proposal, policy approaches, and recommendation from the forum to the appropriate normative and decision-making forums. Here, the Secretary General is revisiting one of the oldest part in the founding document or article in the Internet governance discussion, which is Article 72, just let me find, Article 72 of the Tunis Agenda, officially recognized and endorsed by the UN General Assembly, where among the functions of the Internet Governance Forum, there is a function to identify emerging issues, bring them to attention of relevant bodies and the general public, and where appropriate make recommendations. These words, where appropriate, is one of the most frequently discussed words in the internet governance and digital policy. Here, the Secretary General is advising for adoption of recommendation and clarifying this Article 72G. Is calling also for a more focused agenda for the forum, which is highly needed and appreciated by many actors, and a high-level segment ministerial and parliamentary track, providing somehow governments with their own track, broader multi-stakeholder internet governance field space, which has been missing for a longer time. On the point he calls for forging stronger links among the global forum and its regional and national, sub-regional and youth initiative. Here is a potential ambiguity. In the panel's work, there was a focus on forging links between forum and other bodies like Web Summit, like other major digital gatherings worldwide, because the forum itself has quite a strong links and effective coordination with regional, national, and sub-regional and youth initiatives. Therefore, that part probably will have to be further clarified in the forthcoming discussions. And then there is a need for intersessional policy development, which is again highlighted by many and highly recommended. Need for more sustainable resources and in particular financial sustainability of Internet Governance Forum, and need for more visibility. This is true that the forum and its achievements, for example in e-participation, or the fact that it has more than 100 national and regional forums, has not been recognized even in the UN, let alone on the broader community. Then in section 94, while consultation on digital architecture model will continue in the coming months, I support this measure to enhance the forum and intend to implement them as appropriate. Now, here we have two speeds: continuation of the consultations and implementation of the recommendations as appropriate, hopefully as soon as possible, because the roadmap finishes with the keyword: the time to act is now.